Okay, welcome back. So in this video, I want to talk about communicating with data. And in particular, I want to talk about scenarios where you might be giving a live presentation to an audience, whether it's to a boardroom or to an audience on a stage, and where you're using a presentation tool like PowerPoint, but you're giving a presentation that's very data driven. So there's a lot of charts and diagrams. And I see people make a lot of mistakes when they present data to audiences. Typically what I see is people don't format the charts and structure the presentation in a way that tells a story. They'll throw a very complicated chart on a slide that has a lot of different data series and a lot of formatting, and maybe it's a complicated chart. And what ends up happening is the audience will spend more time trying to understand what's happening on the chart or what is being shown in the chart than actually listening to your presentation. And when you are giving a presentation, you want people to be focused on you and your words and the story that you're telling. And that's why it's very important that you treat data-driven presentations like a story, so that you're revealing things at the right time, you're emphasizing data, and that you're just telling an engaging story. And so what I want to do today is show you some examples of how you can use things like animations or builds and transitions, and even formatting in ways that help your audience understand the data and to help you give a more engaging presentation. Okay, so in my presentation, I'm going to show three different charts. There are three different types of charts, and they're also showing three different data sets. So chart number one, and this is the kind of chart that you will see by default when you plug this information directly into Excel or into PowerPoint. And so what's happening here is this is survey-based data, and what it's showing is essentially people's favorite movie genres, so things like horror, comedy, etc., broken down by different countries. So there's kind of a short list of different countries here. Each one of these stacks here is a different country. So you've got Canada, US, UK, and again, each of the bars, the different colored bars, correlates or shows a different genre. So the blue bar on the left here is comedy, the green bar on the right is science fiction, and so on. Now, again, this is the default chart that you would see when you just plug this information into Excel. A common mistake I see people make is that they show a multi-series bar chart like this one, and they don't format it to make it a little easier on the eyes. But most importantly, I see people add the data labels to every single bar. And the problem with this is you're giving a presentation to a room full of people. You show this slide the way it is, people will disengage from your presentation and just be looking at what's on the screen and trying to figure out what's actually happening on the screen. So the first tactic I want to show is basic formatting. And if you've ever read any of the work of people like Edward Tufte or some of the more contemporary information designers like Cole Nafik, they talk a lot about clutter and simplifying your chart. Now, there are some good fundamentals to follow, but there's also a lot of personal preference that comes in here. But some of the things I've done here is I've removed the data labels, and I'll show you later on how you can reveal the data so that you can still have that information on the chart. But in this case, I've done things like I've removed the chart grid lines. Personal preference, I do like less stark colors, so I go for lighter colors. And I've also lightened the font colors on the axes to just make it a little easier on the eyes. But this isn't really the focus of what I wanted to show. What I wanted to now show is that beyond these kind of basic things that just make the chart a little bit more pleasing to look at, how you can use things like animations to help present the data and tell a story. And one of the things people don't really realize is that you can use animations on charts in pretty interesting ways. And one of the ways is to use something like a simple wipe animation that will reveal the bars as they go. So in this case, I can use a wipe animation, and here it will show the chart grid and axes first, and then I can go through on click and reveal each of the data series at a time. And this is more conducive to telling a story. I can say, starting off with comedy, you can see that Canada and Japan are the most likely to like comedy. And now moving on to horror, you can see that Japan is again most likely to like this genre, and Singapore is close, and so on and so on. So the nice thing about this approach is it's revealing the data one step at a time. And so the way that you do this is you can click on your chart. I used a wipe animation, so we're going to apply that wipe animation. And you'll notice that the default is it'll apply it to the entire chart. And I don't really want that. So when I have my chart selected, I can click on Effect Options up here, and it'll default from bottom to top, which in this case is good. I'm going to leave it like that. But instead of as one object, I'm going to change it to by series. And now it will allow you to reveal each one of those data bars or data series one at a time. And you'll notice on the right side here, you can change some of the controls. So if you want to be able to reveal all of them, and instead of on click, but just after one another, what you can do is you can click the down arrow to see each of the elements here and basically say, once the main chart is loaded, load all the other ones after previous. So you just don't have to engage with the chart. I generally like to leave it as on click because, again, means you are in control of the presentation. You can kind of reveal one, talk about it, and kind of move on. Now, you'll also notice that aside from being able to reveal by the data series, you can also do it by category. And this is what that would look like. So now, again, you can reveal the countries at one time instead of the data series. Now, I personally find this less appealing than the first option because it's a little bit more busy for people to see the whole country and all the genres in one go. There's a lot more processing their brain has to do compared to revealing it kind of one genre, one bar at a time. There could be a time and a place for this approach. So I just wanted to show you that you can swap it between data series or category, but my general preference is to go with the reveal by data series. Now, there is another way that you could format this chart, which is going to be a little bit less automated, but it's an approach that I really like, and it does involve a little bit more formatting, and instead of animations, transitions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this chart as it is, with none of the data labels on the bars, and I'm going to use this as a chance to tell the audience, hey, I have this data set which shows favorite movie genres broken down by country. And you can see that each of these different stacks is a different country, and each of these colors shows a different genre. I don't want them to start looking at the data. I just want to set the context and help them understand what is being shown in this chart. And then what I use is some simple formatting and a transition to highlight different pieces of data within the chart. Now I can actually add on the data labels to this chart. And the way that I'm doing this is quite simple. All I've done is I've created one slide for each different version of this chart. And I've just gone and changed the color of each of these bars to gray, and it'll update accordingly on the legend as well. And then I add on the data labels just for the bar that's in focus. And I add a simple fade transition just to make the transition between the slides a little bit smoother. A little bit more work, and it's not super automated. But again, when it comes to giving a presentation, it's very nice because it gives you this kind of nice, smooth transition, and it gives the audience something to focus on, and you can tell your story the way you want to tell it. And you can do this where you switch between different data series or even compare two at the same time. And if you compare this to the starting point, I see slides like this all the time that have every single data label on the chart at one time. It's too much information. In a live environment where someone is talking over these slides and people are trying to look at a screen and make sense of all this, this is way too much information. So this is going to be a much more story-based approach to revealing the data and helping the audience understand what's in the data set. Second chart. Now we are going to go to what's called a stacked bar chart. Imagine you had a bunch of different pie charts, but they're stretched out into like a rectangle. And what's happening here is this is different data than the first chart. The first chart, the different data series were not really mutually exclusive. So it was based in survey data, and people could have chosen multiple options. They could have said, I like comedy and horror. But this is also based in survey data, but the respondents could only choose one of these options. So you could put this into a pie chart because it is compositional data. So the sum of all these will add up to 100%. And again, before we get into animations and builds, I want to talk just a little bit about basic chart formatting. This is, again, exactly what you will see as a default when you put this data into Excel or PowerPoint. One of the common mistakes I see, especially on a stacked bar chart, is people will keep the axes on the left side. This is often very confusing because each of these bars is composed of parts that add up to 100%. And people, especially people that are less comfortable with numbers, will say, okay, so this is 50% of this 100%. It can get a little confusing. So the axes in this particular chart is not really that important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the axes. I also remove the grid lines. I like to adjust the column width a little bit as well. And another thing I like to do with this type of data is that since it is compositional, I think that a gradient of a single color is a good fit for this type of chart, instead of making each of these bars a different color, which is what the default was here. It kind of made sense in the first chart because each of the different bars was a different genre, horror versus thriller. But these are different options within the same question. And again, you could still have it as different colors, but I generally find that a gradients of one color can be quite useful when you've got this type of data. What this chart is actually showing is it's based on a survey question, and it asks people, how many TV sets do you have in your household? And they could have selected none, 1 TV, 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 6 or more. So you're seeing the kind of breakdown of how many TV sets that people have in their house by different countries, Canada, US, UK, etc. But let's look at ways that you can present this chart in a way that's more story-based. And what we're going to do is apply the same treatment as the first example, where we're going to use a wipe animation and configure it to by data series. And what this will do is, instead of just showing the whole chart at once, it will reveal the chart elements here and one element of the chart at a time. So now you can say, okay, starting off with, this is the percentage of households that have no TV sets. And you can see that it's highest in Canada, followed by Singapore. Then moving on to 1 TV set. This is the majority of the sample, and you can see that it's highest in Japan and lowest in France. And you can keep going. So go through each one of these until you get to 100%. So the way that we applied the wipe animation is we just selected the chart, we go to animations, we add the wipe animation. Again, it's going to default from bottom up, which is great, but what we want to do is we don't want it to show the whole chart. So we're going to click Effect Options and go by series, and that will go through that process where it reveals one at a time. But there is another approach that I also want to show you, which gives you a little bit more control over what you're showing and when, which is similar to the second method in the first example, where you use a mix of formatting and transitions. And in this case, again, I start with the chart that shows everything except the data to help the audience understand what are they looking at. I'm looking at a stacked bar chart that is essentially showing the number of TVs that households have across different countries, and lower on the bars or the lighter colors is either no TVs or less TVs, and higher up on the bars or darker means more TVs. And so again, I don't want the audience to be looking at numbers and trying to make sense of it yet. I just want them to understand the context of the chart. And then what I do is I use some formatting and transitions to zoom in on certain parts of the charts. In this case, I brought them directly to the percentages that have 1 TV. And then again, I can use another transition to jump up to those that have 2 to 3 TVs, and then 3 to 5, and so on. One slight problem with the first method is it will force you to go through every single data series. And this approach gives you a little bit more control in case you don't want to show or go through every single data series or element on the chart. And again, the way that you're doing this is you're basically just going to the chart, you're creating one slide for each iteration on the chart, and I'm just going through and I'm coloring each of the other data series, the ones that I don't want to highlight, as like a light gray. And it'll automatically update the legend there, and I use a simple fade transition just to make the switching between these different slides a little bit smoother. Lastly, I want to show one final chart, and this is going to be a line chart, or otherwise known as a time series chart. Now, this is kind of a complicated chart because it's showing time series data, and it's showing multi-data series, so it's showing 2 different data series, and they're actually 2 different data sources. So the orange line, or the one on the top, is essentially showing the results of a survey that was done over time for, in this case, 4 years. You can see the data starts in 2018 all the way to 2022. This data was collected essentially daily. It's a daily tracking survey. It's been aggregated up to weekly. And this is a question that asked the respondents in Singapore, in the next 12 months, do you think that the economy will improve, stay the same, or worsen? So they had 3 options. They could choose one of the 3. And you're only seeing one of the options, the percentage of people who said that they think the economy will worsen in the next 12 months. If you added on the other 2, it'll add up to 100% because it was a single select question where they had to choose one of the 3 options. But we're only focusing on the people, the percentage of people that think the economy will worsen. The lower line, or the blue bar, is a different data set. It's actually from Google Trends, and it's data from the same time period, 2018 to 2022, and it's in the same country, so it's Singapore, and it's Google searches for the word recession. And the thing that's really neat about this chart is that these two things tightly correlate. Essentially, the people in a survey saying that they think the economy will worsen correlates tightly to people going into Google and actually searching for the word recession, which kind of makes sense, but it's interesting to see these two separate data sets correlate. So what we want to do is we want to find a way to have some time to explain the chart without the audience kind of looking around and trying to understand what's happening, and for you to reveal the data as you go. So in this case, what I've done is I've applied a wipe animation on the chart, and it will start by revealing the basic chart elements. And now what it'll do is it will reveal the first line. And so now I can explain this and set the context and say, hey, what we're looking at is 4 years of Google Trends data for people in Singapore looking for the word recession. And during the same period, we ran a survey every single day for 4 years, asking people whether they think the economy will improve or worsen or stay the same, and look at how beautifully these two charts correlate. The impact factor of showing that reveal is so much higher, instead of just kind of jumping straight to, here's the chart, look at this, when you can kind of reveal it as a story one at a time. So let's go through the steps that you need to go through in order to build the animations in this chart. The first thing I'm going to do is highlight the chart, and I'm going to, again, apply the wipe animation. But it's going to default to, sometimes it defaults from bottom up, in this case from right to left, and I do not want that. I want the data series to appear from left to right. So I'm going to click from left, and again, it's showing the whole chart. So what I want to do here is reveal it by data series, not as one object. So now I've got my basic chart here, and I can control it and reveal data series 1 and data series 2. But they're a little bit fast. So what I'm going to do is I have the animation pane open here. If it's not open, if there's nothing here, you can just click animation pane. And you'll notice you can actually click the open arrow to reveal all the individual objects that are being animated. I can apply different conditions or different rules to different objects, but I'm going to keep them all selected because I wanted this to apply to the whole chart. And I'm going to come to duration and change it to 1 second. So what that's going to do is it's going to slow this down a little bit. It's a little bit slower there. I could change it to 2 seconds or 5 seconds, but I'm pretty happy with that speed. Now, the other thing is my starting point here, I've got all this kind of clutter on the screen, and I want to start with kind of a nice blank canvas. So in particular, I want the legend here to be revealed with the chart as each of the data series is being drawn. So the way I'm going to do that is, first off, you'll notice that the legend here is actually hand created, as opposed to the earlier charts where the legend was a part of the chart. In this particular case, my legend was just kind of quickly hand created. The reason for that is just going to give me a little bit more control here. I've also grouped these two objects here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a fade. Now, the problem here is that it's going to default to fade in that element at the end of this. I want this legend to reveal at the same time that this gets drawn. I know that the group 15 is this element here. All I have to do is drag this to be right after the data series that gets revealed first. So the yellow line is series 1. So I'm going to drag this up so that it's just after series 1. And all I'm going to do next is change this to with previous. That means that once series 1 gets triggered, then this legend will also fade in after that gets drawn. And I also want to do that for this one as well. So I'm going to add the fade. And I don't actually have to move it because it's defaulted to happening right after data series 2. So I'm just going to make sure this is selected, change it to with previous. And let's say I also want this to appear at the very end. So I'm just going to highlight this and click fade. And now what you'll see is if I go into presentation mode, I have this nice blank canvas, so people are focused on me and what I'm saying instead of a really busy chart. And I start by revealing the chart elements. Here is data series 1 with the legend. Here is data series 2 with the legend, and finally the chart. And again, it's a much more story-based approach. You are in complete control of what is being displayed and when, and it just means that you can give a much more engaging presentation to the audience in a way that will help them read and interpret the chart over time instead of all at once. So I hope this was useful for you and that you learned a few tips that will help you give better data-driven presentations in live environments like on a stage or in a boardroom or wherever it is. Just remember that giving a presentation with charts in a tool like PowerPoint should be set up and designed differently than if you're giving someone like a PDF report with charts or something that's rendered. You have the opportunity in PowerPoint to tell a story and to reveal things over time or to emphasize them. And you should use those features and tools in a way that help augment your story. So I hope this was useful, and thanks again for watching.